I'd like to call to order the Audit Committee meeting. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to welcome each of you to the Audit Committee. And we'll start with introductions. I'll start with myself. My name is Patty Sullivan. I'm a member of the PPS Board and Chair of the Audit Committee.
My name is Jennifer Samuels. I'm a community member and member of the Audit Committee.
We're doing a little turnaround, huh? Eddie Wong, Board Chair, member of the Audit Committee.
Okay, and sitting across from me.
Jay Cooper, Student Body Funds Accountant Analyst. My pronouns are they, them.
Okay, and we have someone on Zoom.
Hello, Caroline Zawikowski, she, her. I'm a community member of the Audit Committee.
Great, welcome. Okay, thank you. Oh, let's see.
Kara Bradshaw, Executive Assistant.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. First on the agenda is the follow-up on the status of the implementation of recommendations included in the Student Body Funds Audit. Janice, would you please introduce the item?
Thank you. So last year we issued a report, the Student Body Funds report, that had a couple of recommendations included. So today Jay is here. Thank you so much for being here. He is responsible for some of the implementation of the recommendations along with other people that he works with, and so we can talk about these items. So in your packet, I printed the stat implementation plan. So it looks like this here. And you will be able to see there are a total of 7 recommendations that were made during that audit report. In the column on the far right-hand side, the status update, that column is our audit status of where it is right now. So we did a spot check on a couple of these recommendations to confirm whether or not they were implemented. So based off of that spot check, that is what is included in the status update listed in the far right-hand column. So for each of them, so the first one, it says that in progress, and number 3 shows as outstanding, which we'll talk about that separately. The number 4 is one that I was able to confirm that I had completed the implementation of that recommendation. So what I like to do is gray that out in the first time we talk about it, and then moving forward when we come back to talk about the implementation of the other recommendations, we'll just hide that row so we don't have to keep talking about the ones that are implemented. But we were able to confirm that implementation, and we were able to confirm the other ones are all in progress, which is great. A couple of things that kind of came up specifically as I was talking to Jennifer yesterday. Thank you so much for chatting with me. One of the questions that she asked me was, what is the proper process, or what do you do whenever the staff say they're not planning to implement a recommendation? So for example, number 3 on this item, the recommendation says, we recommend Accounting Services Department strengthen internal controls to ensure student body fund transactions are for allowable purposes and are adequately supported by required documentation. So the district's response was they agreed with the recommendation. However, for the implementation plan, you can see listed there, they said unable to implement and provided some comments about staffing level. So this is the first time that it's actually kind of come up where staff has responded, yes, we agree with the recommendation, but due to whatever circumstances, we're not able to implement. And so Jennifer asked, well, what do you do? I was like, well, there is something we can do. It's called a risk acceptance letter. So thank you for that. So I provided a copy of what a risk assessment letter could look like. You know, it's not required to do something like this. So the next document there is background information about what a risk assessment letter looks like and could be. So risk acceptance letters are not common practice, but it is the way in which we could formally kind of close that loop of just the department saying, yes, we agree with the recommendation, and here's why we can't implement it or we're not planning to implement, and just having that formally documented would be one transparent way of kind of tying that all together. There could be a variety of reasons, which are all reasonable, that the district would not be able to implement a recommendation. So for example, down on the last recommendation, number 7, is related to the athletics pass-through into the student body fund account. And athletics is just getting a new point-of-sale system. And so it makes sense to let that system get implemented and then create the guidance for how that will work as a pass-through. So, for example, that one shows that they're not planning to have it implemented until 2026, which makes sense because the new system will be implemented in the next year. So there's lots of reasons why, but that risk acceptance letter is an opportunity to kind of formally document it. There are ways in which we're less formal. So for example, on that background information down at the bottom of the page, what if we don't use a risk acceptance letter? So in less formal environments, the same message really can be documented in the audit report with the management's response, or it could be documented in the comment section of their implementation document, which is where it is documented. So it's less formally documented, but it is documented. So my question to the audit committee is whether or not you think there would be value in doing a formal risk acceptance letter on some of the random, not very common, but in some situations where staff is not going to implement the recommendation. Do you think there's value in having it formally documented, or are you okay with the way it's documented in the status implementation document? Hopefully, and you can think about it. We don't have to make a decision. I just wanted to respond because there is a formal way of which to close that loop. So I gave you an example of what that might look like, and we can talk about it moving forward as to whether or not you think there's value in documenting that, and you can check out the example that I provided and get back to me.
Yeah, just a quick thought off the top of my head. I mean, I think to answer that question, for me personally, it would be more, I think the focus needs to be on for what purpose. Because I think, like, for example, in this case, because of the reduction in 2.0 to 1.0 FTE and the inability to comply with the recommendation, even though there's agreement, you know, my question for this case would be like, it's not necessarily a risk acceptance, but you know, me personally would like to see a risk assessment, right? In terms of like, you know, what are the potential risks from having this not closed? And if that's the case, I would prefer something like that, a risk assessment. But if there is something that there's agreement that there isn't any risk or further, personally, speaking for myself, I'm fine with the way it's documented now, because I think, again, I think for me personally, I think the focus needs to be on the purpose. You know, is it trying to fix something, or is it just creating more? If the documentation creates, for example, like a roadmap to fix it in the future, yeah, that has worth. But I would, I guess, balk at any kind of just paperwork for the sake of paperwork.
I noticed one thing. It says that review procedures have been modified to align with current staffing level, but it doesn't say really how it's modified. So we don't know if it's modified to meet the risk.
Yeah, so all of the risks are really identified in the actual audit report that was issued last year. So when we do the report, we do a lot of testing to look to see if something is not happening the way we think it should be happening. And each of the recommendations are tied to an example identified in the audit report of non-compliance. So the risks are really laid out in the audit report, but I could see about pulling some of that information if that would be of value. I'll try to come up with something and circulate it as a template to get some feedback, and maybe we can talk about it next time.
So, I don't think what we have here is adequate to tie things off because we had the finding, with a recommendation, an agreement that staff was going to do it, and now because, I'm assuming because intervening events, now saying, no, we're not going to be able to do it. So to me, it seems like there should be some sort of tie-off, and whether it's the risk assessment letter or something else, seems like that's, or the something else is important because, for example, like I'm not really comfortable with just what it says here that because there was a reduction, we're not going to be able to ensure that the transactions are for allowable purposes. So my question is there some other mechanism aside from having this more formal process to ensure that? So, for example, the person who's actually like engaging in the transaction, not the reviewer, like could they need, like, do they attest that they're for allowable purposes? So like that's, then you're like moving the accountability to the person who's submitting them or whatever the process is. So I'm wondering, instead of having this other sort of review, that we're putting it back on the person who actually is submitting whatever the transactions are, that they're actually attesting to their for allowable purposes.
That's a great question for Jay. When they submit the transactions, is there a check mark or anything that says they're asserting that they're allowable, or authorization?
Yeah,
kind of?
well, it depends on how or what form that transaction is occurring. You know, if it's through a procurement card, a P card, there's a sign-off procedure. It has different levels of approvals, reviews that come along with that, and you know, or if it's a check that also has different levels of approval, review, which come from the staff member who's actually writing the check to the principal to then spot checks that are happening through the review of their monthly reconciliation reports. So there is some level of that happening. It just depends on what form, you know, or how they're going about issuing payments.
We did find situations. We did. And really, we found a lot of situations where we didn't have the supporting documentation for us to be able to determine whether or not the expense was allowable or not. So this recommendation is really focused on the supporting documentation piece of it, because that's where we really saw the biggest lacking of information was related to the supporting documentation. It's hard to look. So as an example, if somebody puts goes to Amazon and buys something on Amazon, on the receipt, you know, the bank statement or whatever statement, it says Amazon, but it doesn't tell you what the actual item is. So unless there's another piece of documentation that says what you bought at Amazon, we can't determine determine whether or not that Amazon purchase was allowable or not because all we see is Amazon. Does that kind of?
Yeah, so two workplaces I've spent a lot of time in, if you submitted something like the general Amazon thing, like you basically wouldn't get reimbursed. So I'm curious that that the district reimburses without supporting documentation, because that's certainly not best practice. So, and I'll tell you, it motivates people to provide their supporting documentation if they don't get reimbursed. So I'm wondering if there's another mechanism versus having somebody else check, did you provide the right supporting documentation? So, I mean, that would be a question that I would have, and actually, it then makes it a self-enforcing mechanism. And yeah, every once in a while there is the missing receipt, but that should be the norm. Like I know, like right now at the county, if you're missing a receipt, like it's a whole other process versus I just submitted whatever and I got reimbursed, and then somebody's chasing me or I had something. So maybe this is a question for, I don't know. Is there a way to build that in, that like you don't get reimbursed if you don't provide the right documentation, or it's not allowed?
The reimbursement process really is kind of separate from this. And they do, if we're talking about a reimbursement for an employee, it does require supporting documentation, which includes a receipt. Otherwise, there won't be a reimbursement. That doesn't necessarily come directly through me. That's another area of the department. However, when we're talking about like a check being issued, there is documentation that's required in order for them to issue that check, like an invoice, a proper invoice. You should be able to tell what it is they're purchasing, along with other information. And depending on the dollar amount, it would require other forms of approval that would come from a principal. And so in the review process or in the audit process, it seems that there were just documentation that was missing that would accompany those check stubs.
That was
and you can
exactly
speak to
one
that.
of the examples we found. There was the check stubs, but the supporting documentation for it was missing. So we could see on the check stub who the check was written to, but we didn't know for sure necessarily what the check was for, the purpose of the check, or what was purchased with it without the supporting documentation. Okay, so I think I have an idea. I think I hear, this is the first time we've had a situation come up where even though the district agrees with the recommendation, they've said that they are not going to implement for whatever reasons. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that you expect a little bit more than just that to kind of close off on, feel good about the implementation of this recommendation. So for those two items, why don't I talk with Jay and bring back at our next meeting kind of in between, where we can kind of document some of the things that they are doing in lieu of adding the additional procedures that we recommended.
So, oh,
Whoops, Caroline has her hand up, or her little hand up.
Thank you. I was just going to say, for this kind of form or some other process, it does seem like a pretty rare occurrence, and it would be something to use sparingly, so not necessarily a lot of additional work. And to me, it seems like it could also be risk-based in terms of, how much of a risk does the auditor see this as? If it seems like an unacceptable risk for the school district to be taking, then I think it could be elevated up to whoever is at a higher level to provide a little bit more explanation in terms of why they're accepting the risk. But if it's something where it's not as pressing, in terms of whether we're using this form moving forward, I think it could be helpful for very specific situations.
yep. If I can kind add on to what Caroline's saying, because I completely agree. I think it would also be nice, because, I mean, it looks like this problem is something that also may just require a little bit more problem solving to figure out, right? Because we have less personnel to figure out, and we have to be creative, right? I think I guess my point is there, my question maybe, is doing something like this, the risk acceptance letter, is it a process that automatically triggers this to be revisited in the future? Because that would be probably the most important thing for me, especially when things that, should be looked at again, right? And so having a system where things that, like this occurrence happens, automatically triggers like, hey, we will re-review this and, set a deadline, for example, like
So
in a year.
on the risk assessment letter, it does have a date for reconsideration, but we don't have to do the letter for that. I could just internally document to revisit it. So that is a thing. It is on the letter, but it could be done in multiple ways, and that is what I'm hearing from you. So that's what we will do. We'll set a date to revisit any recommendations that aren't where they've planned to accept the risk. We'll set a date and reconsider. Is that okay?
Thank you.
I mean, the one thing I would not want is, well, the audit committee looked at this and like, all you have to do if you don't want to implement something is like, we don't have the staff to do it. Because that seems like kind of contrary. I know that's not what happened, but it seems like the audit committee is like, then the audit committee is accepting the risk like, oh, well. So I think what is this, something else short of the risk letter?
The something else is
I'll come up with something.
somewhere that you're gonna
In
review
between.
it. It's not just
Yeah.
gonna be overlooked.
Yeah, this is the first time it's kind of come up in this way, so I'm just kind of throwing out ideas and getting feedback for what is the best way. And I think it sounds like a little bit more than what we have in the spreadsheet, but maybe not as much as a formal risk acceptance letter. So I will work on that and get something kind of with that in mind, come back with a proposal. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Just for those two
Yep.
recommendations,
Sounds like you need to make a
and I'll
rubric.
work with Jay on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the discussion. Any other comments, Jennifer? Anything? Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to go to the next item on the agenda, and this is the status update related to the RFP process for the external ACFR, and I want you to know what those acronyms stand for, anybody who's not an auditor. The RFP is the request for proposal. The ACFR is the annual comprehensive financial report. And that was the auditor's contract that we made for that report, the people who do that report. So Chief Morrison, would you please introduce this item?
And good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you. As the situation page outlines, our contract with TKW had expired as of the end of March, and we did go out for additional proposals, and we did only receive one, and it was come back from TKW, and so we went through the process of evaluating it, even though there was only one. And they did meet all of the proposal requirements, and so we have accepted the proposal and have entered into contract. Currently scheduled to have our interim audit starts week after next.
Okay, that was pretty simple.
Very
It's
straightforward.
done.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Having the audit, and this I know from our auditor, having the audit committee participate in the selection process for the external auditors is best practice. And I would like to thank our community member, Caroline, Caroline, for your willingness to serve on the selection panel for this process. And also thank you to the purchasing and contracting staff that were able to provide assistance and guidance for those of us who were doing this for the first time, which was definitely me. So I learned a lot. The contract with TKW, which is Talbot, Corvola, and Warwick LLP, to provide these auditing services was approved by the full board in our regular board meeting on April 8th via Resolution 7081. The contract with TKW shall continue through March 31st, 2030, and may be renewed for up to an additional 5 years by amendment signed by both parties. I think that wraps this process up. And before we move on, are there any questions or discussion from audit committee members about this contract?
I just have a comment. I want to thank the committee members and the chair for making sure we did this the right way. And I know there was a couple of years where the board didn't do that, and this is best practice. So really appreciate that you reestablished this, Chair Sullivan, because like I say, this is sort of one of the just fundamental issues that are we engaging in the right level of governance and oversight and participation in selecting the auditor is one of those things. So thanks to everybody who participated and following the process. Even though we had one recipient, it's important for just credibility and trust in the board's engagement in the process. And thank you, Caroline.
And thank you, Julia, because you kind of pushed us on that too. And I do appreciate it. The next item on the agenda is discussion of the Office of Internal Performance Audit budget request for the 2025-2026 school year and related benchmark. And again, that OIPAs comes up often, those initials, and that does stand for Office of Internal Performance Audit. So Janice, would you please present this item?
Yes, thank you. So in your packet, you will see the budget proposal document that looks like this here. So what I did is I put the budget request for next school year. I listed the current the current 2025 budget and the last year's budget, just so you could see, for multiple years what the budget has been. You can see that there is an estimated increase. The bulk of that is related to salaries and fringe benefits, with the biggest piece of that coming from PERS. Because there was a question after talking with Jennifer yesterday, I did a quick spreadsheet for you to show the difference in each line item of where the cost increases are coming, and you can see that about $20,000 of the $32,000 is related to the PERS. But we are not requesting any significant changes from last year. I got the budget numbers related to salary and fringe benefits directly from a budget analyst in our budget office. So I feel really good about that estimate. And then I did list a little bit of an increase related to professional development. I'm required to have, myself and Mary Catherine were both required to have 80 hours of continued professional development every 2 years. And I'm a little behind on getting to where I need to be, so I need to step that up this year. So there's just a little bit of an increase listed so we can go to a couple more trainings. Are there any questions?
Let's see. Anybody? No? Okay. Okay. What?
forgot, I did the benchmarking data for you. Oh my goodness, I just spent a lot of time on these. Sorry about that. Also in here is benchmarking data to show you, to kind of provide some perspective on the budget request. So in here, in these benchmarking data, you'll see a chart. The first one is the general fund investment and internal audit. So it's a chart that shows where PPS is in relationship to 31 other school districts that are mostly part of the Council of the Great City Schools. The Council of Great City Schools has a job alike quarterly meeting for internal auditors. And so we've been working to gather all this data from the different school districts, and so you can have an idea of where we are in comparison to other school districts. I would like to mention that we are really on the small side of, when you look at all the other members of the Council of Great City Schools, we're definitely one of the smaller ones, so it's not apples to apples, but there are a couple of school districts that I think are pretty comparable to us, and I like to point out Seattle as being a comparable district. They're the largest in the state of Washington, similar to the way we are. So in each of the charts, I identified where Portland Public Schools are. The average is listed in there as well. So you can see for that first chart for the general fund investment, we are slightly below average, but not far below average. And so that's one thing. The next chart talks about the number of auditors per $100 million in the general fund. This is sometimes a metrics for determining staff sizing for internal audit departments. It's not the only way in which people can use to create staffing, but it's one of the metrics. So we put a chart in here to show where we are in relationship to the other schools. Again, we're just we're below average in that area. Not quite as, not too far below average, but I think it's pretty reasonable. The next chart talks about the number of auditors per 1,000 students. Sometimes this is also a metric some school districts use to help determine staff size for their internal audit department. So that's why we collected the data, and you can see Portland Public Schools is listed there, and again, just a little bit under average. The next chart listed is the percentage of internal audit departments that report to the school board. I thought you might be interested in knowing what other school districts do in this area, and you can see that the largest portion of the school district internal auditors do report directly to the board, so 87% do report to directly to the board, as do we, so that's good. We also did a chart for the percentage of school districts that have an audit committee. So we did have some where the auditor reports to the whole board, but not through the audit committee, so that's 19%, and 81% do have an audit committee like we do. The next chart is the audit committee composition. So every school district does it a little bit different. Some audit committee boards or audit committees are made up of board members only. Some are made up of community advisors only, and we fall in the mixed category, which is really considered best practices to have a mix of board members and community member advisors. But you can see in that chart, the bulk of school districts only have school board members. So we're leading the charge on best practices in that category. The next chart shows professional audit standards. It's a chart that just shows which audit standards are being followed by the schools, and you can see the majority of school districts are using Red Book. We, by policy, use Yellow Book. In the past, one of the biggest differences between Red Book and Yellow Book was the Yellow Book has a mandate to serve the public interest. Well, and that was not included previously in the Red Book, but they just did a new version of the Red Book. They update these audit standards every now and then. And serving in the public interest is now included in the Red Book, so they're even more comparable. Right now, we primarily use the Yellow Book for everything that the Yellow Book covers. The Yellow Book is silent on a lot of items related to the overall management and operations of an internal audit department. And for those type rules, we do refer to the Red Book only because the Yellow Book is silent on those items. The next, the last slide is related to budget allocation for training. And we listed in there how much of our budget is set aside for training for the auditors. And you can see we're just a little bit below average and just a little bit, and we're requesting just a little bit of an increase to that budget this time.
Lots in that presentation. I'd like to open it up for questions from any audit committee members. I
So-
had a,
I was just say, at a certain point when we're at the budget, I think one thing that would be useful, just, not that we're gonna spend a lot of time, fortunately for you, during the budget process, probably on the internal auditor's budget, but I think it would be useful to, just share, also have one last slide that shares what other Oregon school districts are doing, because that I know we're the only ones that so this is interesting national data, thank you. But I think in 2003, the state auditor did an audit on, they basically had a series of recommendations for state agencies that if you had a budget over $100 million, that you should have an internal auditor. And after that, that's when we instituted the internal performance, we're not a state agency, but we certainly had a budget over $100 million at the time, so we instituted the internal performance auditing function. But no other school district has followed suit with creating that I know of in Oregon that has created an internal audit function. They all rely on contract. If they have anything, it's relying on contracting auditors. And I just think it's worthwhile pointing out that PPS engages in best practice, because we don't often get credit for that. Like I say, this is more like, here's what's happening nationally, but I think we should also show that in Oregon, we follow best practice.
So do you think I should check the top 5 school districts, next 5 down and show?
Or just a couple.
Do
I
a
mean,
chart
I
for
think
them?
Beaverton has a contracted model.
Okay.
And I think some of the other districts, like when we need it, which is not really when you shouldn't. We have an audit service. Or we have an annual financial audit, which obviously everybody has, but I say the better practice is for government functions that have a certain size is to have internal capacity.
I would like a little bit of an explanation about the difference between the red and yellow book and why we use or have to use, do we choose to use or have to use the yellow book?
You take a drink for that. So PPS's policy is, so when the school district, when the board set up the Office of Internal Performance, there was, I think, probably discussion back at that time period in development of the policy to say which audit standards the board would like followed. And so that was a decision that was made before my employment. was around for those conversations, so maybe she remembers some of the discussion about whether or not we should follow the red book or the yellow book. Like I mentioned in the past, one of the biggest reasons why government auditors used the yellow book is because the mandate to act on behalf of the public interest, and that was not included in the red book. So for the most part, government auditors have really primarily used yellow book in the past. However, with the new audit standard for the red book that was just issued this year, that is now a mandate for them also. So I could do a pros and cons. There's been a lot of discussion amongst us internal auditors about which one of these audit standards would be would require the least amount of administrative work. And you know, I don't really have an answer to say for sure following the red book would relieve some of the administrative burden, and so they'll free us up to do more audit work versus the yellow book. It's not exactly that answer, but I can put together pros and cons list for you for future conversations, but it's just not an easily answerable item.
Okay, I don't want you to spend a lot of time on it, but I was
Okay.
just curious
Yeah.
if there was a big difference. Okay, so any more questions about this? Okay. Before we move on to the next item, we need to vote to approve the budget request for the Office of Internal Performance Audit. Please note that we, as the Audit Committee, do not have the authority to formally approve this budget. Our approval allows Janice to submit this budget request. Formal approval of the budget will be made by the full board as part of the board's normal budget approval process. With that being said, Audit Committee members, would we like to approve the budget request, or are there any objections? This is
So
informal.
we're approving her to submit it.
Yeah. Yes, Carol? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is status update on the Audit Committee's work plan. Janice, it's up to you again.
Okay, in your packet, I provided the Audit Committee work plan. This is the Audit Committee work plan that we started with at the beginning of the year. And so what I did to give you an idea of where we are as far as achieving each one of these items on the plan, for the items that we've already achieved, I put a check mark by each of those items. And for items that we haven't gotten there yet, I put an ETA for when we are anticipating getting to that item in the work plan. So, do you have any questions about the work plan, or do you want to go over it in more detail? I just wanted to give you a quick visual of check marks so you could easily see how much progress we've made and what's still outstanding, and a rough ETA for when those outstanding items will be available.
This is great, because I love seeing what we got done and what still is to come, so thank you for this.
I noticed that a lot of them that are not completed are kind of saying carrying over to what we'll be doing next year.
There are
So
2 items.
we have to keep that in mind when we think about new things.
We will.
Okay, anybody else? We have a lot of the information here. Does anybody want to discuss it? before we move on?
I just have one item and this is to, I think, address something from last year. Last year, the audit committee did not get the bond audit until September. And also the audit committee did not inform the auditors on the topics of this year's audit. It was staff, and that actually it's not the staff can't make recommendations, but really they're the audit. They're being audited. So best practice is that there be solicitation from other groups. So I'm noting on the bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4 is it says we'll probably be ready in June, and I would say that especially after last year, this absolutely should happen this year so that we get back on cycle to be, especially given the amount of money we have and from the bond. And that it's represented in the community that the board is providing oversight on the bond. So just I would hope that the word probably would be struck, and that we've got the auditors for sure coming in June, and again that they're having conversations with committee members and others about audit topics for the following year. Again, it's just it got off cycle, and we should get back on cycle so that we're showing that we're actually providing the oversight and engagement around a pretty big bucket of money.
So I know that Director Sullivan had her meeting with the bond auditors a couple weeks ago, right? And I think they were reaching out to you to get your input as well. Did you have? Good. Okay. Yeah, but you had yours. Yeah.
I think potentially we've had a lot of discussions now as a board about the cost of the high schools, and frankly that could have been an audit topic last year that could have provided some guidance as we headed into the referrals and some other topics that we've had, whether it's curriculum and some variety of things from the 2020 bond audit that would have been really helpful for us to have as we prepared this referral. So it's more, so I'm glad those conversations are happening, but it's also we should tie it out so we can pivot forward versus having it sort of having a long tail into next
So the
year.
reason why I put probably is because I don't want to make any commitments on behalf of other staff, but I did already reach out and have talked to the applicable staff, and they have said, yes, we think that we'll be good to go for the June meeting. So, but I didn't want to say for sure because I don't want to commit on behalf of somebody else. So,
Well, I think
But
this
it
is what the
I'm
audit
working
committee
on
should
it.
be asked. I mean, yes, and I think the audit committee should be asking for that presentation and to get that scheduled.
Yeah, I think we did ask for a date, and it turns out it's some sort of a retreat for staff.
oh,
That's what we're trying to get
so
on the June date.
yeah, at the end of this meeting, I think Director Sullivan is going to talk about scheduling the June meeting. And so if we could kind of firm up a date, then it might make it easier to do that communication with the bond auditors to help facilitate them doing the presentation. So yes, and it is definitely the plan to have that at our next meeting.
I mean, this is one of those things that's sort of like eat your broccoli. But it's not the thing that everybody wants to have scheduled, but like I mean, hopefully it's just a boring meeting. But it needs to happen, because when it doesn't happen, that's when it becomes, we're sliding into not doing our oversight, which
And I
happened
wasn't
last year.
following the bond auditors as closely as I am now in the past, just because they're doing their thing. But I made some notes in my internal workflow so I can send out an email to help provide a little bit facilitation when it comes to those things. So I got an email saying, we issued the audit report, we're waiting for the district to respond. So I'm kept in the loop a little bit more so I can provide you better updates. So I hadn't done that in the past. I'll do it better moving forward just to help facilitate, you know.
Yes, because I've noticed that you and also you, Director Brim Edwards, were trying to put all of the things the audit needed to do on our regular calendar in a
Right, so it just
way
like
that
happens
we
like clockwork,
remember.
and then it becomes like, oh, we're having that boring meeting again, that like everything's going well, but it's when you don't have them that, and you start skipping them. So I really appreciate, Chair Sullivan, you.
and
sort of-
appreciate Janice too very much for helping me learn about this.
Yeah,
So it's
and
very
in this particular case, because the auditors have provided the audit to the district, it's really like, they need to file their management response and then it needs to be delivered to the audit committee and the board. So it's not like we're waiting for the auditors, we're really waiting for PPS staff.
It's a process, but I agree, you're right.
Yeah, and you've been reaching out already.
I have been
We're trying
reaching
to-
out, and I definitely think it's the plan. I just can't commit on other people's behalf. But we will, as we get closer to that meeting, I will send a formal email to confirm, and I'll let you know for sure whether or not they're ready. And if the answer is no, they're not, I will be in touch with you to let you know.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, I think we should be much, it's not to you, I think we should be much more directive, is like, we expect to get the audit, like, and here's the date it is,
Well, I will skip to the end here and
Okay.
ask about that date. 'Cause
Okay,
we were
go
going to ask about June 17th, if that could work for members of the audit committee anyway. Then we'd have to reach out and see if it works for everybody else. But if it works for us, at least we could have a starting point.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know if you have your calendars right now, but if you could look at them and get back to me or Janice in the next day, actually. I mean, it's not that hard to look at your calendar and see if that's free for us. And we can work from there. If, as I think I heard, staff has some sort of a retreat, then we're gonna have to look at something else, but let's start there.
Okay.
it's already on our calendars.
Okay, so we're
Which,
good?
which gives them almost 2 months.
Say again?
There is something,
Well, I mean, it's like,
So Roseanne is mentioning the staff will be that week at COSA? COSA?
well, we are going to work on it
Okay,
yeah, I mean,
immediately.
there's, I say, well then, like tomorrow, staff getting a number of dates that they're there, that the auditor's there, but it seems like you get a COSA and then people are on vacation and it's like, there's a whole host of reasons. And last year, it was 4 to 5 months late and it didn't inform our referral work. And I don't think we should do that again, so if that's what they're gonna come back and say, they're at COSA, so let's find some other dates then that work for everybody.
I will get emails out about that tomorrow.
Thank you, Janice. Okay, anything more on this? Okay. The next item on the agenda is discussion of the performance evaluation for the district's internal auditor. One of the ways we help preserve the independence of our internal auditor is to have her report directly to the board. As a result, the board has the responsibility to complete an annual performance evaluation for the internal auditor. As the chair of the audit committee, it is my responsibility to draft and deliver the performance evaluation. And I would really appreciate input from each and every one of you. Over the next week, will each of you please take a few minutes to think about the performance of our internal auditor and send me an email or give me a call to provide your input.
maybe a suggestion, to send us like, here are the things that we're measuring and, comment on that, and then, you just leave an open-ended question at the end, but maybe
good idea.
let us know what, because that's more valuable than,
Maybe include a job description is helpful for commenting on what we see.
Thank you. That's good information. I will try to put that together in the next couple of days. Okay, next, planning for future audit topics. Janet, please present this item.
Great. So one of the things that the audit committee gets to do is to suggest audit topics for us to audit in the future. And I think it's a really great opportunity for audit committee members to really participate in the process and think critically about risks. What are risks? What do they look like? What form are they in? And whether or not doing an audit related to the topic would really add value in that situation. Sometimes there are risks that are known risks that are not really suitable for an audit, or whether an audit wouldn't necessarily address the risk. So I wanted to give you guys some examples of ideas of what risks might look like. So I printed an example sheet for you guys. And so in here, there's just a list of what a risk, so we'll just talk about the first one as an example. So one risk might be cybersecurity related to phishing attacks. So the risk description is employees may fall victim to phishing emails leading to credential theft or malware installation. Sorry. So this is an example of a risk, and then so those are the things that I'm asking you guys to give me. So for example, I gave you a template where that's a place for you to list out 3 different risks. So I'd like, if at all possible, for each of you to think about the example risks that I gave you as examples and fill in the template with at least 3 risks that you would like me to look into. I also printed a copy of the board goals for you guys just as a refresher, because when you're thinking about what could go wrong, what are some of the biggest risks, maybe connecting them to our board goals adds value. So just as a refresher, I printed that so you can each take a look at that and think of risks associated to some of the board goals as well. Then what I'll do is you'll send me those 3 with just the risk description, and what I will do is I'll collect those risks and answer some of the questions that are below in the examples. So for example, if one of you had sent me the risk related to the cybersecurity, then I would get the risk and I would do some asking questions around about what are the existing controls that we have. And so I'll be able to let you know what we have in place, and then we can have a better discussion about, does it warrant an audit? Do we really need to look into this based off what the internal controls that are already in place? Or perhaps maybe even though there's internal controls in place that look great, maybe there's a risk that the internal controls are not being performed timely or consistently. And so, but that will help facilitate the question with a little bit more detail to have a more robust conversation about future audit topics in our next meeting. Does that make sense? What the list of risks as examples, do you want to talk about them? I I wanted to give you an example to look at so you would have an idea of what kinds of information, what is considered a risk. A couple of other prompts that auditors like to ask when talking about risks is questions like, what keeps you up at night? When you think about PPS, and you losing sleep over it, hopefully none of you are, but what do you lose sleep over? What keeps you up? If this happens, it really worries me that if this happens, that is what I'm looking for. And as detailed as you can be, you can, you can handwrite them and hand it to me, or you can fill it out online. I'll email you the document and you can fill it out and send it to me. You know, and if I have a lot of questions about it, I'll reach out and talk to you individually about what it is before putting it all together to come back for a discussion in our next meeting.
I'm curious how many new audits can you do? I mean, I know we're carrying quite a few over.
We're going to talk about that next time, please.
Okay, so you want to get the best one. Okay.
But yeah, when we look at all of the risks that were suggested, we'll be able to say, well, this one looks like the most significant one. This is the biggest priority. So we're not going to be able to pick all of the audits that are suggested, especially if each of you come up with 3 ideas. We definitely won't be doing that many, but it does help us think about it and put some thought and process behind identifying those risks, assessing them to really know whether or not it's a real risk or if it potentially is just perceived public perception of a risk. So that's what I would like to do. And that's how you guys could help me.
Yeah, and we'll see how many overlaps there are too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if there's
that would be interesting.
overlap, that's good
Yeah, that'd be
because that means it's
something more important.
more important.
Yeah, Caroline, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you for involving us in this process. I have a couple really quick questions. One, if I'm thinking about risk, sometimes I'm thinking about what hasn't been looked at in a while. And I'm wondering if there's any audits that you have done that we should be aware of, like something that's not on the work plan, either as a follow-up or like a status update or a current audit that has already been done that maybe we should know about so we don't suggest that risk. Or I mean, maybe we do if it's a really big risk, but and then my other question is if you have any guidance on scope, like the example risk of declining student achievement is pretty broad, like broader than say something like more focused on 3rd grade reading. So just in terms of your capacity, if it would be better to look at things that are broader or more narrow.
Well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that question. It is definitely my intent to try to do narrower scoped audits. The long audits are it's just too much for our audit size. We need to reduce the scope and be more focused and cover one specific thing and kind of move on. So as we can talk about that at a more detailed level based off the risk that is identified, and maybe there is multiple elements within the risk and maybe we just pick one to help reduce the scope so we can turn more audits. So we'll maybe perhaps pick only the biggest risk within that category. And the other question is, I actually do have a risk register of risks that we've talked about in the past and maybe not selected. So I can send that out as an email. So you'll have a list of the ones that we've talked about in the past and whether or not we've selected them, you'll have a complete list. Would that be helpful? Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Janice. In fact, maybe you and I could meet to put together a good, an email that will be helpful.
Yes.
to people. Okay.
I appreciate the context around including the board goals for students when we're thinking about what risks to take a look at. Caroline stated more eloquently than I will, trying to figure out a scope of, what the size and shape of something like this could be. But keeping our goals for our students in mind, I wonder if there are, I'm not sure if this is relevant in auditing, but I wonder if there are examples or case studies that we can look at from other districts who have done risk studies and made recommendations that have directly positively impacted things that would be included in the stated goals, board goals for students.
Thank you for that question. Let me think about it and get back to you. I'm not 100% aware of exactly what you're talking about. However, most school districts do some sort of formal risk assessment. The last time PPS had a formal risk assessment was back in 2016. And so that risk assessment is posted on the PPS audit report page. And it just identifies a lot of all the risks that people could come up with. So that is an if you guys want to check that out on PPS's audit report webpage, it does give a very high level identification of risks that were applicable back in 2016. So we definitely want to base our audit plan, our future audit topics, off of risks, but I haven't done a formal risk assessment like broad over the whole district. So I hear what you're saying, and there might be an opportunity for me to come up with something, so let me think about that, and I will get back to you.
Frankly, from an enterprise risk level, probably our largest risk right now is real and immediate, what the administration might do in terms of reductions of key federal funding streams. I think it's bigger. I think it's bigger than this audit committee, but for sure, I think we should be assessing that, because as we head into the budget cycle, we can't just head into the budget cycle as if nothing might happen, because I think a lot of things could happen. So I'm not suggesting it as an audit topic, but I'm actually suggesting it maybe for a bigger board conversation, because I do think that is a much potentially a much larger risk for us being able to move ahead with the board goals and everything else. So that's one thing. The other thing I had a question about, and I don't know the answer to this, but maybe Chief Morrison might as well. Does the Health and Welfare Trust, which the district sends a huge contribution to every year, did they have a separate independent auditor that we'd have access to that? Because I think for the purposes of the PPS budget, we usually just see like, here's the amount we send.
They do have an annual financial report. It's on a calendar year basis, so they're under current review for their fiscal year 24, and we're expecting to see their report very soon.
And is it just a financial audit?
It is.
And do they ever do performance auditing?
I am not clear on that yet. I am a brand new member of the trust, so I look forward to learning more about it.
So that would be my follow-up question. Just like best practice, because we contribute a very substantial sum. Is it? Do you happen to know the amount it is?
I don't off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'm happy to circle back. They do provide kind of an annual report for utilization by carrier, but that doesn't reconcile necessarily to the premiums that we are submitting to them or the payments that we're submitting. So I do look forward to seeing that report as it comes out and reconciling it to the actual costs.
Can you circulate to the committee last year's annual audit?
Yeah, I can get that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
more discussion? It looks like I'm going to be sending some things out to everybody about evaluating Janice, getting your input, and then Janice and I will work on this.
We'll work on a
What
risk
are-
register.
Yeah. And
There's a couple of emails you'll get from us next week.
yes, okay, that sounds good. So we'll be meeting. So thank you, everybody. Really great ideas and discussion. Really appreciate it. The final agenda item for today's meeting is public comment. Do we have any public comment? Well, that was easy. Okay, so to wrap up the meeting, I just want to remind well, I pretty much already said it. Just remind everybody that we have 2 take-home assignments. The first is my assignment to send stuff out on your email about input for the internal auditor's performance and also our audit topic ideas. And we already talked about that June 17th date. It looks like all of us are available, but we have to find out if it works for other people. And I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.